So after F1's return to Canada, it was a 2-week break before heading back into Europe, and more specifically to Middle England and to Silverstone, the home of the British Grand Prix, and also a venue that played host to 2021's most controversial incident. Or was it this one? Oh no, wait, maybe this one. Oh no, definitely this one. Actually, forget it, let's not open that can of worms. But back to 2022, and coming into the race, it was Max Verstappen well out in front at the top of the standings, leading the way by 46 points to teammate Perez, helped out by the Mexican throwing away his qualifying in Canada, and then his car deciding to throw away the race as well, as it seems the real Red Bull-Ferrari battle this year is not for the title, but who can build the most unreliable cars. A bit further back, a team making moves was Haas. But I didn't say good moves, as after being in 3rd place after the first race, they're now in 9th and have taken a dive that Nikita Mazepin would be proud of. Hey guys, it's Taron and welcome to the On Track channel and to round 10 in Great Britain. Now, just before we get going, a friendly reminder to give the video a thumbs up if you do enjoy it, it always helps out with YouTube's algorithm, and don't forget to subscribe if you're wanting to stay up to date with all of the F1 content. Also, we're getting even closer to hitting 10k subs, so all the support is always really appreciated. Now with that out of the way, let's get into my honest review of Formula 1 and the 2022 British Grand Prix. So into the build-up, and well, there's a fair amount to get to. First off was news coming from Nicholas Latifi, with the Canadian saying how the deficit to his teammate was down to more than just the drivers, and that he thought his car wasn't capable of doing what Albon's was. Sounds kinda like a certain someone else who blamed their pace on a supposedly different car, though this time it is less of a make my son quicker or I pull the funding situation. And talking of the crazy Russian, we got word that Nikita would be suing Haas for his lost 2022 salary, after he was dropped before the opening round in Bahrain. Which, when you consider his family's business produced around $2.5 billion of profit every year, the situation is kind of like if I were to take someone to court over the £2 I lent them for McNuggets the other day. Elsewhere, we had the annual Goodwood Festival of Speed, where fans from across the country could go and experience a weekend of motor racing activities, with the F1 team showing off cars such as George Russell driving the W12, meaning the young Brit got to drive the best car he's had all year. And for the fans, there was the chance to feel what driving a Mercedes was like, with their porpoising simulator being one of the festival's attractions. And talking of simulations, it was the time of the year when the brand new F1 game was released, and so F1 thought they'd hype it up by getting the drivers to guess their in-game ratings, which led to most of them trying to awkwardly justify why their teammates were slower than them, without just flat out saying it, not looking at any pairing in particular. Then over at Alfa Romeo, there was news from Valtteri Bottas, as he revealed that he very nearly quit F1 after the 2018 season with Mercedes, though looking back at some of the performances from there onwards, you can kinda make the argument that he basically did. Then at Red Bull, we had a story of Christian Horner complaining that the FIA was too biased towards one team in particular. F1 really wouldn't be F1 without this guy throwing his toys out the pram at every opportunity, now would it? But the story did come after the FIA had introduced their technical directive to help teams combat porpoising, with Horner saying it was all biased towards one team. Yeah, I can't possibly think of any occasion where F1 or the FIA has helped out with Red Bull. It just doesn't happen. And moving swiftly on, further down the grid, we got wind of the news that Aston Martin were looking to re-sign Sebastian Vettel for the 2023 season. But after finishing 7th last year, and now currently sitting in 8th place, the real question is why, if given the choice, would anyone want to stay there? Not to mention the fact that that team is built around some rich guy fundamentally buying a team so his son can have a seat. But rounding off the news on a more serious note was the topic of racism and its place in Formula 1, or more accurately, the fact that it has no place in F1. You see, this topic comes up after former world champion Nelson Piquet and Red Bull Jr. Yuri Vips were recorded using racial slurs over the past couple of weeks, with Vips also having his contract terminated with Red Bull as a result of the incident. Now, the attitudes portrayed and the language used rightfully angered the F1 community, as to reiterate, there is no place for racism in this sport, or any other for that matter. I know it's not quite the fun, jokey finish to the build-up as per usual, but these incidents serve as a reminder that while we've come a long way, there's still a ways to go. Now onto the race weekend with something more light-hearted, as before cars were on track we had some events organised by Sky, with drivers racing space hoppers against their teammates. And it seemed even when racing these things, Carlos Sainz still isn't quicker than Charles Leclerc. Not gonna lie, also kinda surprised they didn't have the Mercedes boys giving it a go, after all they are now experts in bouncing down the straights. But in Papaya, the McLaren teammates did get a run, and well, let's just say Daniel Ricciardo took the opportunity to smash Lando in the face. Though in all honesty, taking out your teammate before the race is probably the Aussie's best shot at beating him this year. Also, can't wait to see how Drive to Survive write the plot for this one. So onto the actual sessions, and given it was now July, we were treated to prime British summertime. This is of course the pouring rain, with every car that headed out onto the circuit using the intermediate tyres for their install laps, and a couple of flying ones too. But once the cars did venture out, we got to see some of the many upgrades that the teams had brought, most noticeably Alpine, with the team deciding to gouge out their side pod and form a sort of Red Bull-Ferrari hybrid design, and while they're hoping to pick up the pace of the top teams, they'll be wanting to steer clear of the associated reliability. But as the session went on, with the track still drying, it gave a strange scenario of sort of a half of it being wet and half of it being dry, which meant that for teams it was hard to get some meaningful running, with cars on track being a rarer sight than a good Nicholas Latifi performance. I mean, it wouldn't be an honest review without slating him now, would it? But with the drivers all staying in the garage, the genuine topic of conversation turned to Mercedes talking about having shots. The coffee kind, that is, as clearly after years of working with Valtteri, a love of the drink has rubbed off on them. But as the time ran down, there was nothing really happening, as FP1 may well have been the deadest session I've ever watched. Well, besides a typical Monaco Grand Prix, that is. But with 5 minutes to go, it was Lewis Hamilton that ventured out on the softs, followed by all the other cars, as he ended the session trying to see if the upgrades that Mercedes had bought would actually make the car, well, a bit less useless. And just when we thought the session would end, we were introduced to F1's newest toy, Pedal Cam, as we got up close and personal with the feet of Lando Norris. And knowing F1's desire for making money, I wouldn't be surprised if they're selling those pictures online in a bit. But with dry tyres on a pretty wet track, someone was bound to lose it, and that person was Lance Stroll. I mean, did you really expect it to be anyone else? But anyway, the Canadian spun his car into the gravel at the damp Copse corner, which brought out a red flag and concluded FP1. Now onto the second part of Friday running, and luckily for the teams, the track had dried up substantially, allowing them to get out and get some meaningful running. And early on, it was the wind being a bit annoying, as it just about caught out Max Verstappen with a tailwind into turn 3. But over at Mercedes and George Russell, the annoyance came from something shaped more like a McLaren, as Lando Norris, well, was kind of in the way. Now on the whole, the practice sessions are for, well, practice and trying new things, and over at Williams, that's just what they were doing with a new aero concept on the side pods. And to test it out, they completely drowned the car in Flovis, with the FW44 looking like it had ploughed straight through a Dulux paint shop. At least their sessions were running without issue though, which wasn't the case for Lando Norris, as the McLaren team were practicing their pit stops, and well, just had the rear jack brake and dropped the car on the floor. Still probably a quicker stop than last race though. But as the session went on, a continuous theme, as has been the case all year, was bouncing, and one person finding it particularly annoying was Carlos Sainz, with his Ferrari bobbing as much as usual but through the high-speed Copse, losing him a lot of time. And another team having some issues were Porpoise King's Mercedes, with the same corner turning out to be a bit problematic. The bouncing forcing Hamilton a little wide, and then the curbs finishing the car off, as some of the aero pieces were broken away. But apparently bouncing along is the way to go, as come the end of the session, it was those two at the top of the timesheet with Sainz just ahead. So on to Saturday's action, and unlike the day before, it started off dry, meaning we had cars on track from the start of the session, or in the case of Charles Leclerc, ever so slightly off track as he dipped a wheel in the gravel at the exit of Luffield. But sadly for me, looking to fill the section with stories and incidents of note, after that everyone was generally keeping their cars pointing the right way. And as usual, this left the minds of the commentary team to go off wandering, as they produced the idea of Brawn GP, the musical. Which, to be fair, I think I could get behind. With headline tunes of Where's Your Double Diffuser and Jensen All the Way, the West End may well have a new sellout show. But back to the track, and in preparation for qualifying, we had soft tyre running all round. And I know it's still just practice, but for the first time this year, the top 3 teams all looked very competitive, and that included Mercedes. Which may well be due to this, a message which I don't think we ever really expected to see. Oh no, that's more like it. But as we're sort of getting accustomed to, it was Red Bull who were looking like they had the best package, with their car stable in the corners and quick on the straights. Which meant that by the end of the session, it was Verstappen at the top, with teammate Perez a couple of tenths behind. So on to qualifying, and as usually the case in the UK, the dry weather didn't last long, as before Q1 the rain came down and forced everyone to start on intermediate tyres. And with the fear that the conditions would get worse, everyone wanted to get out early and set some lap times. But as it turned out, the conditions sort of stabilised, meaning the drivers could set lap after lap on the same tyres, with the overall pace of the track improving. And while at the front, the top teams were generally getting through pretty comfortably, further back at Williams something was brewing. And while you may think it was Albon with something spectacular, it was actually Nicholas Latifi, as the Canadian not only outqualified his Thai counterpart, but made it through to Q2. Actually, now that I think about it, just outqualifying your teammate isn't really a very high bar to set. It's not like he's getting the car into Q3 or anything, right? But joining Albon out in Q1 were both Haas boys, along with Seb Vettel and Lance Stroll down in last place, so at least there's some sense of normality restored there. Into the second part of qualifying, and early on there were issues for Mercedes, with Hamilton complaining of vibrations and Russell saying he had no grip on the tyres. So with those issues, the duo then instantly went P3 and P4 because that's just how it works. Over at Red Bull a little later in the session, there was also a moment for Max Verstappen, as he went wide trying to improve in the wet conditions. Conditions which were starting to get a little worse, meaning that nobody would be improving their lap times, and the top 10 as it stood would be going through. So that was Verstappen P1, makes sense, Hamilton in P2, the Ferrari duo in 3rd and 4th, Russell and Norris next, Alonso in 7th, with Perez in 8th, a good outing for Joe in 9th, and then wait, no, I can't have read this right. Let me just check the classification quick. What? So yeah, that happened, somehow. I haven't been this shocked since I found out Man United paid 80 million for Harry Maguire. So anyway, Q3, and cars were setting quick laps, well except Verstappen, who was busy impersonating Tony Hawk with a backside 360 out of Stowe. And with no lap time from Verstappen, it left Zhou Guanyu on provisional pole. Right, can something normal please just happen? My heart rate can't take this. 3 seconds, what is happening? Well, as it turned out, it was the track getting drier, well, less wet is probably the more accurate description, but it meant that people were improving their times, left, right and centre. With Leclerc going top, then Verstappen going top, then the Mercs slotting into 2nd and 3rd, before Leclerc went P2 again. Before, after the next set of laps, the Ferraris had themselves a 1-2, but not for long as Verstappen went P1 and we were down to then the final run. And the person to put in the lap when it really mattered was not Charles Leclerc, not Max Verstappen, but Carlos Sainz, as the Spaniard claimed the first pole position of his career, and I'm sure he'll be overjoyed with it, because as Will Buxton once said,
"You want to start from the front, because it means you've got the other 19 drivers starting behind you."
So after having a good time on Saturday, Sunday began with issues for Ferrari, as Charles Leclerc's car, well, just wouldn't start, as an electronic control unit wasn't working and had to be replaced. It wouldn't be Ferrari if they weren't having issues on the grid now, would it? But onto the race, and if you watch the Grand Prix, you'll know exactly where this is heading. That is of course to a big crash at the start of the race, most noticeably involving Chinese driver Zhou Guanyu, where just before turn 1, his car got flipped and slid along the tarmac and the gravel before getting awkwardly stuck between different layers of the crash barrier. Now, thankfully he was okay, and that's really testament to the safety of F1 nowadays, but big crashes are always a scary sight. Also, caught up in all of it was Alex Albon, who, after lifting off to avoid a collision, was hit by the unsuspecting Sebastian Vettel from behind. And after hitting the wall, he spun into the path of Esteban Ocon, as well as some of Yuki Tsunoda. Now, all those incidents brought out a red flag, which forced the cars to slow down and return to the pits. And somehow, out of all of that, only 3 cars ended up out of the race, with those being Zhou Guanyu, Alex Albon, and George Russell, with the Mercedes driver picking a fight with the FIA over the recovery of his car, as after the incident he pulled over and jumped out to see if Zhou was okay, but given his car was surprisingly unscathed besides a left rear puncture, he wanted to drive it back to the pits but he couldn't get it started, and when he went to go ask the team what to do, the marshals channeled their inner magpie and said we'll be having that nice shiny silver thing, as they loaded the car onto a truck, which meant George was out of the race for receiving mechanical assistance. So yeah, red flag, and as it turned out, that may well have been a good thing, as a bit further down the lap, some protesters, well, I'll give them their proper name, complete and utter idiots, had gotten onto the track. Now, protesting something you believe in or care about, that's fine, but doing it in a way that's so irresponsible and dangerous, putting not only your own life but the lives of others at risk, is just so utterly stupid. But fortunately, nothing came of it and they were dragged away by marshals and dealt with by local authorities. And after all of that happening, before the end of lap 1, I'm now going to go and get myself a drink to help me relax. A cup of tea, that is. I'm British, what were you expecting? So on to start 2, and the grid was reset to the original order, because rules, which meant that the great starts for Verstappen and Hamilton, along with the poor ones for about half of the grid, didn't really matter. And after the second lights out, Sainz held the lead to Verstappen, with Perez getting past Leclerc, which, let's just say, annoyed Charles, as he yeeted his Ferrari up the inside of turn 4 and into the Red Bull of Sergio Perez, which damaged both Checo's car and Leclerc's, with the Mexican eventually forced to pit as he was losing too much time, an issue that Charles Leclerc wasn't having, as despite missing an entire end plate, he still had the pace over his teammate, as the Monegasque was easily holding onto the back of Verstappen ahead and Sainz in first place. Sorry, did I say Sainz in first place? He bottled the lead running wide through Maggots and Beckett's, which let Max through. But as it turned out, it wouldn't really matter for the Ferrari driver, as a couple laps later, Verstappen was into the pits with what he believed to be a puncture. But it actually turned out to be mystery damage to the floor of the car after he ran over some debris, which, while not terminal, did turn his Red Bull into something that resembled more of a Williams. And talking of Williams, our Canadian GOAT had surprisingly not dropped down a million places after starting 10th. Instead, he was just holding up all the cars behind him in a textbook Latifi train. But back to the front, and with the cars running first and second, you'd think it was all smiles at Ferrari. Well, kinda not, as even with a damaged car, Leclerc still had more pace than Sainz, who was in the lead. And with Hamilton catching them both, you'd think it would make sense to swap them over and see if Leclerc could pull away. Now that would make sense, unless you're Ferrari, who decided the best way to handle it was to do absolutely nothing, before eventually bringing Sainz in on lap 20 and swapping him over to the hard tyres, leaving Leclerc in free air to pull away from Hamilton, or as it turned out, be caught by him as the Brit closed the gap to a second before Leclerc was brought in as well. And given Sainz had a few laps to get to grips with his hard tyres before Charles, the Spaniard stayed ahead after the stops, meaning Ferrari found themselves in the exact same position they were in 10 laps ago, but this time pulled the modern day Fernando is faster than you and let Charles go by. Now with both Ferraris having pitted, this left Lewis Hamilton in the lead with clean air. Yes, you heard that right, 2022 and the Mercedes is in the lead. But he was also eventually brought in, coming out a few seconds off of the Ferraris. And just a bit further back, there was some nice racing going on between Max Verstappen and Esteban Ocon. And at this point, the French Alpine car searched deep, went back to its roots, and threw in the towel mid-battle, with Ocon grounding to a halt along the old pit straight, and given the exposed position, a full safety car was called. And with a safety car came yet another opportunity for Ferrari to prove themselves completely useless with strategy, as they decided to leave Leclerc out on old hard tyres, while everyone behind him boxed for brand new softs. Honestly, just when I think Ferrari can't do much worse, they go and completely outdo themselves. But moving to the restart and realising that they may have just made a mistake, the pit wall asked Sainz to back away and give Leclerc 10 car lengths of space, with the Spaniard's response telling the team to jog on, as at the restart he forced his way into the lead at the loop. But he wasn't the only one making moves, as just behind it was Perez getting past Hamilton, with a lovely little switchback at the loop giving him third place. But from there, the next few laps are what I can only describe as some of the best racing I've ever seen. I apologise in advance for not being able to present it as fully as I would like, because, you know, FOM copyrights, but I shall do my best. So, Checo goes down the outside of Leclerc and cuts the corner, forcing Leclerc wide, leaving the door open for Hamilton to get past them both. Also giving us a line of commentary to rival, but here comes Sebastian Vettel.
Perez goes off the track, cuts the chicane, off goes Leclerc, through goes Hamilton!
But it's not over, as Perez dives up the inside of turn 3 and gets past the Mercedes, with a compromised Hamilton meaning Leclerc gets his Ferrari up into third place going round the outside of the loop. And then we can take a breath for about one lap, as now it was Hamilton's turn to try and pass the number 16 Ferrari, with the pair going side by side at Vale, side by side at Brooklands, switching sides for Woodcock, before heading down into Copse, still right next to each other, with Leclerc pulling off the move of the day by holding it around the outside in his old hard tyres and staying in third. If someone could show Christian Horner a picture of two cars side by side at Copse, that'd be much appreciated. So yeah, Leclerc stayed ahead, for about 5 corners, as Hamilton then got by with DRS along the Hangar Straight. And now we can really breathe as I go to make myself some more tea, with Leclerc in 4th, Hamilton in 3rd, Perez in 2nd, and Carlos Sainz in 1st place taking his maiden win in Formula 1, and what a race to do it in. Anyways, that is all for now. Thank you very much for watching. Do give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see some more F1 content, but until next time, take care.